there by Greaves.
Jimmy, you're enjoying a fabulous life. You're one of the greatest forwards the game has ever known.
Thank you, Brian. Kind of.
You're one of the best-loved television stars now. I'm just wondering where in life maybe you've got most satisfaction, as a player in those early days or as a TV favourite now?
Oh, from television, without any shadow of doubt. I look back and think, well, I got a great deal of satisfaction being a professional footballer, obviously, but it's another life. And I think it was a life that I was born to. I didn't know anything other than playing football. I think it was pretty obvious from a very early age that I was going to be a footballer of some sort. And indeed I was. And also I think when you're young, you tend not to appreciate things as much as you might when you get older. Now, with a television career that is coming up to 10 years standing, I didn't take it up until I was 40. You appreciate what you've got. And I think because it was something I never ever dreamed I would ever be associated with. Never ever dreamed I would do anything of this nature. It come totally out of the blue. And I think because of that, I appreciate this much more. And in actual fact, because I didn't have the inborn ability to do it, I think I've sort of much more grateful for the television career. Really.
I think a lot of people would be surprised that you get more satisfaction working with the Saint than maybe you do with the teammates that you had in those glorious times in the 60s and 70s. And that's fascinating, because you began life, you were the son of a man who drove a London tube train, who encouraged you greatly in the game and so on. You were a schoolboy star, played for the county sides and so on. And your first club was Chelsea. Now tell me how they were attracted to you.
Well, it's amazing. There were several clubs. There was Tottenham, West Ham and Chelsea, but Chelsea seemed to be the most persistent because they had a man called Mr. Pope in those days, whose real name was Jimmy Thompson, and he was a great character. And of course he pillaged Dagenham, really. I think the only person he didn't get was Ken Brown, who lived in the same road as the Allen brothers, Les and Dennis, Terry Venables. They all lived in Bonham Road. Oh, Martin Peters went to West Ham as well. So Jimmy Thompson was the man, and he was the man who in our area got most of the players to go to Chelsea. I think he rubbed the mums and dads up the right way. I think that was the key to it. I know he gave my father 50 quid in Irish fivers. That helped influence things in those days.
Hello, Jimmy Thompson. And the first manager at Chelsea that you worked under would have been Ted Drake.
Yes, Ted. Ted was the manager. Of course, it was Mr. Drake in those days.
And you made your first appearance in the first team, I think, at the age of 17.
Yes, I was 17. It was the start of the season, and
what sort of impact did you make early on, Jim?
Well, fortunately for me, quite a good one. I scored in my opening game against Tottenham at White Hart Lane, and things seemed to go very well for me from then on. I never looked back. I was very lucky, very fortunate.
Well, where we're unlucky, of course, that was in the dark ages so far as television and film were concerned. There's very few examples of you as a Chelsea player. But here's one, actually, in a cup tie against Bradford City when you just started your Chelsea career.
Out come Chelsea at Stamford Bridge for their third-round cup tie with Bradford, who were all in white. Bradford win the toss, and before 32,000 fans, the match gets going. On form, of course, Chelsea had the advantage, but cup ties don't always go by form. Chelsea opened the score anyway through Blunstone. That was after about 20 minutes, and only 5 minutes passed before they did it again. This time it was a goal by Braybrook. Just as it began to look like mere shooting practice for Chelsea, Allen scored for Bradford. Chelsea, however, were quite unmoved by this reverse, and just before half-time, Braybrook had the ball in the net again. Crossing over with a 2-goal lead, Chelsea had the match pretty well in hand. In less than 5 minutes, Greaves made it 4-1. And the home team hadn't finished yet. Their final effort, clinched by Livesey, was the neatest goal of the lot. 5-1.
So what are your memories of that moment?
Well, yeah, I don't really remember the game that well. I mean, it's nice to see some of the old players there. Peter Braybrook, of course,
yes,
who scored a couple that day. Pete and I used to travel to the game together, and we used to stop off for our pre-match meal at Moody's at Canning Town, which was pie, eels and mash. That was our pre-match meal. That wasn't bad,
That's
really,
unique,
in those
that
days,
is.
was it?
Actually, it's worth just reminding everybody, you were the youngest player to score 100 goals by the age of 21, a scoring record that really was quite phenomenal. 7 hat-tricks, 3 times you scored 4 in a game, and against Wolves in 58-59 and West Bromwich Albion in 60-61, you actually scored 5 goals in a game. Now, do any of those performances to this day stand out for you, Jim?
No, they don't really. I can't remember them, Brian, in as much as that how I scored the goals. I can remember that Billy Wright, of course, was playing for Wolves the first time I scored 5 goals. And Wolves, of course, were the team in those days, as you know. And in the second game against West Bromwich Albion, who should be playing in that game, of course, but it was Bobby Robson.
Really?
Dear old Bobby, yeah, who's now, of course, manager.
And as a wing half, might well have been somewhere close to marking you, I suppose.
Well, he couldn't have been that close that day. But in fairness, no, I mean, Bobby was a midfield player, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I don't know whose responsibility it was. Probably big old Ray Barlow, someone like that.
But, I mean, a scoring record like that these days, you would be expecting to earn about £5,000 a week. You could command that sort of money anyhow. What were you making at Chelsea at that time?
I think my contract at that time was £8 in the winter and 7 in the summer, and 17 if you got in the first team. So it's £17 a week if you're in the first team, £2 for a win and £1 for a draw.
That's amazing, isn't it? When you look back on that.
It is, yeah. And a free dinner ticket every day.
Is that so?
Free lunch ticket, yeah.
Not bad. And who were the great old characters at Stamford Bridge in those days?
Well, the Sillett brothers, obviously, Peter and John. I used to knock about with them. I mean, they were great. Peter took me under his wing, really, and was a smashing bloke. I mean, he really was a gentleman, a lovely man. And John, of course, Snoz, alias my old pal Snoz, now manager of Coventry, who I've sort of remained friends with all my life. The thing about Chelsea in those days was we called them the All the Best Club, because we never had a team talk or nothing like that. I mean, you know, Ted was always on the golf course. And
that's Ted Drake, the manager.
Ted Drake, and you know, before the game, we just used to say, all the best, and run out. And that was it. But all the players were great, and there was a real good club spirit there. Even though we were battling for 5 years virtually at the foot of the table, we used to score a lot of goals. The trouble was we used to let a lot in, but it was good fun.
And you had a ruck with the defence a few times, didn't you?
Oh, yes. Occasionally we used to get upset. I mean, Frank Blunstone once did say, if we scored 5, you'd let in 6, you lot. And one day at Preston, that actually happened. It was one of my better days again. I scored 5 up there, and I think we've only finished up winning 5-4. And every time we let one in, they were saying, well, you've got to go up and score another one, you know. And I mean, it's easier said than done, obviously. But
Around about this time, you also, as a very young man, got yourself married.
Yes, got married to Irene, and we lived in Wimbledon, in a one-room flat that Chelsea had provided for us. It was actually in Wimbledon's ground, and during the summer we all used to find jobs because we needed a little bit of extra cash, and I worked on the Wimbledon ground, cleaning all the terraces up for the following season, with Eddie Reynolds, yes, who once scored 4 goals for Wimbledon, 4 headers, in the FA Cup final.
Yes, indeed.
Amateur Cup final, that is. And so that's where we lived, in Wimbledon's ground.
And I'm sure, like most schoolboys, you had your heroes too in the pro ranks. Now, who would your heroes have been?
My main heroes were all inside forwards, really, because that's what I was. Ever since I started playing the game, the desire to score goals and play attacking football was there. I never ever once wanted to play defensively other than to play in goal, which is always, everyone wants to play in goal for a bit of novelty, don't they? So inside forwards were my heroes in those days. I mean, apart from your Matthews and your Finneys, of course, but I mean, you had your Manions, your Carters, and your Dohertys, and your Jimmy Hagans. But my favourite player, I would think, would be Len Shackleton. Because I saw Len a couple of times. I was never a great follower of football. I used to go to Tottenham occasionally, when they had the old boys' enclosure right in the corner there. But by and large, I was a player, not a watcher. I'd play in the mornings and in the afternoons. But occasionally I'd go and see Len Shackleton, and he was my favourite because he used to do things just a little bit differently from anybody else. And that's how I wanted to play the game, a little bit differently from anybody else.
Your first match as an international was in an under-23 against Bulgaria, but it wasn't long then before you in fact made your full England appearance. I think that was on a South American tour, wasn't it? And it was against Peru in Lima. Do you remember much about that?
It was a long way, I remember that, and it's a long way to go for your first England cap. It wasn't a very successful tour from England's point of view. We'd already been beaten by Brazil. I got the call. We got hammered by Peru, actually, but I did manage to squeeze a goal in from a Johnny Haynes through ball and managed to knock one in on my debut, which was nice.
And you've mentioned a guy there that you, I think, regard as one of the greatest, Johnny Haynes.
In my mind, I think Johnny Haynes was the greatest passer of the ball the game's ever seen. We've had great passers of the ball. We've had the Glenn Hoddles, and you can talk about many, many players who can pass a ball. But to me, Johnny Haynes had the greatest vision, and he without doubt, was the most accurate pass. He was the one man who could actually put the ball perfectly into your stride. Not just pass the ball to the man, but pass the ball to the space. But not only into the space, but into the space perfectly as you moved onto it. He was, without doubt, the best passer I've ever known.
Well, he was great to play with, I'm sure, in the early part of your England career. And here are some of the England goals now in that early part of your career, starting with the match against Spain in 1960 against a team led by the great Alfredo Di Stefano.
And after only a minute's play, a centre from Smith to Greaves, and it was a goal. What a shock for the brilliant Di Stefano and the supposedly invincible Spaniards. The ground was rain-soaked, but less so than when they beat us in Madrid. Spain on the attack now. Del Sol crashed the ball into the net. So perhaps England's early confidence wasn't justified. The Spaniards were level and threatening. Swan headed clear. But back it came for Springer to get it away this time. The English defence came safely through their only shaky period of the game. A header by Douglas put England into the lead again, a few minutes before half-time. 2-1 isn't a winning lead, so England began the second half determined to increase the score. Jimmy Greaves and all the other forwards made it impossible for Ramillet's to relax for a minute. It speaks volumes for the skill of the Spaniards that the great Di Stefano and his teammates showed, even on this sodden pitch, the brilliant ball play for which they're world famous. Bobby Charlton was in terrific form on the left, but so at inside right was the Spaniard Del Sol. Centre-half Swan couldn't stop his pass to Suarez. The inside left equalised. Then Charlton's shot was well saved by Ramirez. Back came Charlton. A centre, and Bobby Smith headed England's third. Now leading 3-2, England dominated the play. Another goal might have come their way, but for the alert Ramirez. 8 minutes before the end, Smith calmly lobbed the ball over the goalkeeper's head. Another for England. Spain were a beaten side. England winning 4-2, a wonderful tonic for football, are back in world class. Perhaps it was to be a match of real brilliance by the inside forwards. But it was England's turn first. Centre forward Bobby Smith had possession. On to Greaves, and the wonder man of Chelsea was too quick for Kelsey's dive. Smith-Jones tried to retaliate, and it was a close shave. A goal up in 2 minutes, England attack again. There was no holding those forwards, even on the sodden pitch. Bobby Charlton made no mistake, 2 for England. On the mud, England were faring better than their opponents. Bobby Smith passed to the right, and again it looked dangerous for Wales as the ball came back into the middle for a grand header by Smith to get the third goal. England led 3-0, and that was the score at half-time. England pressed at once. So far, their inspiring captain, Johnny Haynes, hadn't scored. But watch him now as he gets number 4. On came England again. Douglas on the warpath. A tremendous save by Kelsey. Welsh outside right, Medwin beat left-back McNeil. It looked promising for Wales, but they had no luck. England nearly got the 5th goal after a Kelsey save. Smith charged, but the Welsh goalkeeper was convinced that the ball hadn't crossed the line. The referee agreed. Greaves dangerous again, and yes, it was in the net.
There's certainly some full-blooded stuff there.
Well, what's amazing about that is the Bobby Smith-Jack Kelsey challenge, where they both get up and pat each other on the head and smile. Can you imagine that today? All 22 players would be piling in. Those goalkeepers have got it soft now, Brian.
They have, James. So they are, victory against Spain and a victory against Wales. In a matter of a few months, it was going to get even better. England 9, Scotland 3.
Jimmy Greaves gave a perfect pass to Robson, and he scored. Then, that £100,000 worth of footballer Jimmy Greaves scored goal 2. In goal for Scotland, Haffey wasn't having all the luck, but no mistake this time. The England forwards were beginning to look like world beaters. In centre, Bobby Smith led them beautifully. Greaves took his pass, and it was goal number 3. Scotland now fought back. Their hopes rose when a foul was given against England just outside the penalty area. The kick was entrusted to right half Dave Mackay. He pierced the defenders, 1 for Scotland. Haffey just saved from Charlton, a narrow escape. Johnny McLeod sent the ball to outside left, Davy Wilson, and it was Scotland's 2nd goal. Douglas scored after a free kick, and England's 5th goal came from Bobby Smith. Even now, Scotland didn't lose heart. Though England led 5-2, Pat Quinn scored their 3rd. Johnny Haynes scored from the edge of the box. Oh, it's terrible. 2 minutes later, the ball found Haynes again. Like a flash, it was in the net. Barely 60 seconds after Haynes' last goal, Greaves scored again. Hat-trick for the Chelsea wonder, and England hadn't done yet. Bobby Smith got goal number 9.
You got a hat-trick yourself that day.
Yes.
I mean, that 60, 61, that sort of era, that was a fabulous England side, wasn't it?
To my mind, and it's not sour grapes, Brian, about 66, but I think that's the greatest England side of all time.
Even better than the one that won the World Cup?
Better than the one that World Cup. It was an outstanding footballing side.
And the Scots took a long time to get that out of their system. I mean, your sparring partner, the Saint, was actually playing in that game.
Yes, Ian was playing in that game. Dave Mackay took it quite badly, and I don't know how Saint took it. I've been too frightened to ask him, to be perfectly honest. I wouldn't mention it, wouldn't dare show it or anything.
But a lot of credit, actually, to the manager, Walter Winterbottom, who'd got a good side together. I mean, he was the team manager, but he didn't select the side in those days because they had a selection committee.
That's right. Walter had to battle. He had to battle against a selection committee that obviously wanted their own particular favourites. But I think Walter was such a good manager. He knew what was the best side. He had a tough job to do, but he did it very well.
Now, at about this time, you'd already committed yourself, hadn't you, now to a change in your career with AC Milan, playing in Italian football. How did that come about, Jim?
I don't know. I got approached by an Italian restaurant owner, who else, and said, would I like to go to Milan for a lot of money? And I said, sounds all right to me. And before I knew where I was and thinking not too carefully about it, I'd signed for AC Milan.
Which I think you now regard as one of the biggest mistakes of your playing career, don't you?
I think it was a mistake in as much as that I would have liked to have made it successful and wasn't able to because of my own inability to settle down. So in that respect, it was a mistake. Not so much from the footballing point of view, because I settled in quite well, football-wise, but it was just a mistake of a young man doing the wrong thing at the wrong time.
And you did it for money?
I did it for money, purely for money. From £17 a week, I was promised, anything up to 5, 6, maybe 7, 8,000 a year, which is a bit of a difference, Brian.
Mm. In fact, there were quite a few British players playing in Italian league football at that time. The newsreels caught up with 1 or 2 of them.
First to Vicenza, and Jimmy Greaves, after weeks of changing his mind, finally plays in Milan's opening game. Greaves has a tough baptism, but scores his first Italian league goal from a penalty. It clinches a 3-0 win for Milan, but Greaves now knows that he'll be the most closely marked forward in Italy. Over to Genoa, where Joe Baker and Dennis Law make their debuts for Torino. But Torino go down 2-0, although both Britons play well. Law, number 8, makes chances, but Torino's finishing is poor. In Milan, the biggest success on the field is England centre-forward Jerry Hitchens. Playing for Inter Milan against lowly Atlanta, Hitchens scores with a flashing header. Hitchens is the most dangerous forward on the field, and when the ball comes back from Suarez, he scores his second with a 20-yard drive. And brilliantly led by Hitchens, Inter Milan go on to win 6-0. Over now to Turin and Juventus, where the British veteran of Italian football, John Charles, soon scores against Mantova. And that's the kind of goal that the Italians hope for from all their British stars.
In fact, you know, I mean, you had a good record in Italy, didn't you? Was it 9 goals in the 14 games you played?
14,
I mean, which is almost unheard of, that sort of ratio. Why did it go so wrong so quickly, Jim?
I don't know, it was off the field. It was a combination of things. Had the no maximum wage not been lifted in England, suddenly you could earn £100 a week back here. Niero Rocco, it was Vianney that signed me, and then Rocco took over because of Vianney had a heart attack. Yeah, and he was very anti-British, one has to say that. He certainly was anti-me, and he made life difficult. And it was maybe a combination of those two things. Maybe a bit of homesickness, obviously. It's not like it is today. You can go out there in an hour and things like that on an aeroplane. In those days, there was only 2 flights a week, and I kept missing them, Brian.
Yes. How did he make life difficult for you, Rocco?
He kept actually telling me the wrong things. You know, you've got to be at the training camp by 10 o'clock, and when I'd get there, I'd be 15 minutes late and immediately be fined a few million lira for being late. And all in all, it was very making me do things like go to bed in the afternoon when I knew other players weren't, and things like that. I'm not placing too much of the blame on him, but I think things might have been different in Milan for me, and it might have turned out differently, but it didn't. So
Were you the most disciplined sort of guy, though? I mean, you, as a young man,
no,
then?
well, as you know, I mean, discipline's never been my strong suit. Personal discipline is, but I've never really been the sort of guy to probably knuckle under, as you know.
I mean, there was talk that you decided to stay on in London when Mitzi was born. You know, until she was born, you wouldn't go back to Italy. Was that?
Well, that was talk. I mean, in fact, it was only 2 days. I was allowed home until Mitzi was born, and the fact that she was born 2 days late meant that I went to Milan 2 days late. A whole big scene about it blew up, but in actual fact that wasn't really a major problem.
So how did you start to get back? Because you were only out there, what, 3 or 4 months, weren't you?
Well, the difficulty was, Brian, I was playing well for Milan and scoring goals, and of course to the Italians that didn't make sense. Why is this unhappy guy keep going on the football field and scoring goals for us? Maybe he wants more money. And that's what they kept doing. They kept offering you more money, and you kept saying, no, I want to go home, but they're saying, no, you're scoring goals, you've got to be happy. I wasn't happy. I was just scoring goals out of misery. But eventually they realised that it had come to the stage where I was prepared to do anything to go home. And at that particular time, Bill Nicholson had come out with John Battersby of Chelsea, and they wanted to make it a Dutch auction, but John Battersby and Bill Nicholson decided that they were going to bid that amount of money, £100,000, less a pound in Bill Nicholson's case for some reason best known to himself.
And what did you get for that now? What did you get when you came back? I mean, presumably you came back a wealthy man from Italy.
I came back totally skint.
Really?
I had nothing, no. I mean, Milan never paid me any of the money of my agreed contract, which is fair enough, because why should they? They knew I wanted to go home. They're not going to lob me tons of dosh just for me to go home with, so they held it all back. So I just had enough barely to live on. We'd got rid of our home before we went out there, so we come back to nothing. We actually lived with Irene's mum and dad in a 2-bedroom council house with her brother, sister, and we had 2 kids at the time, so the whole lot of us were living like that for about 4 months before Tottenham found us a home. I was totally skint, and I signed for Tottenham for £60 a week, which was £60, £120 Chelsea had offered me. So I signed for half for Tottenham. But I was
60 quid a week.
I was so happy to play for Tottenham.
Well, you came back and you played in a reserve game at Plymouth. There was something like a 13,000 crowd down at Home Park for it.
It was.
And then we came back for your first league appearance at home to Blackpool.
When that great goal scorer Jimmy Greaves arrived at White Hart Lane, it's not surprising he was in demand for autographs. Spectators, of course, were all agog to see him in action for Spurs in the match against Blackpool. Jimmy's farewell score for Chelsea last April was 4 goals, and everyone wondered what his magic would produce today. The crowd had to wait 40 minutes before anyone scored. Then it was indeed Jimmy who netted. Yes, Jimmy Greaves was back all right, and the cheers had scarcely died down when he got his second. Having cost his club nearly 100,000, he contributed handsomely to its 5-2 defeat of Blackpool, scoring again in the second half. Back with a hat-trick.
So, a hat-trick in your first game, and
Yeah,
2 of them
nice.
headers, James. I mean, that's a bit unusual.
Very unusual, actually, Brian. I don't know what went wrong there.
When you look at that now, what are your memories of that, those early times at Tottenham?
Well, they were difficult times because I'd come back to a very great side, a double-winning side.
Yes.
And because of the press, a bad press that I'd had and the bad publicity over the Italian business, I think I had to prove myself to what was a great team and a great bunch of players. And to say I wasn't readily accepted would probably be a little bit false, but it was a difficult thing to go into the dressing room because they thought, well, here comes this spoilt brat, which I don't believe that I was, but that was the image that was conjured up in those days. So I had to get down. The only way you could do it is by doing what one did, really, and that was become part of the team both on and off the field.
But from day one, the fans loved you, and they're not the easiest fans to win over, always, the Tottenham fans.
No, that's absolutely true. Tottenham fans aren't the easiest. There's been a lot of players suffered because of it. Fortunately for me, I think that they were looking for something a little bit special. Fortunately for me, I was managed to give it to them on the day in the form of 3 goals and a resounding 5-2 victory to be part of that. And I feel from that day we struck up an immediately a great relationship with each other.
And they were great times for Tottenham fans, weren't there? Some fabulous European nights. I remember one in particular, the European Cup semi-final against Benfica, which I think even to this day, you and every Tottenham fan feels that you were a little bit cheated there.
Well, we were robbed. There was no question about it.
Well, let's have a look at it now together.
We were robbed on both occasions, really. This was the second game when we were 3-1 down.
After the first leg in Lisbon.
After the first leg. And we'd got badly beaten in Lisbon, and we had 2 perfectly good goals, I felt, disallowed. In Lisbon, I mean, I took the ball past the full-back on one occasion and hit it in the far corner, and the referee still gave me offside. So we were a little bit hard done by out there, but we were determined to right the wrongs in this situation, and we thought, well, if we've got a little bit of luck going for us, we'll do it. And we didn't have early on. The ball bounced very favourably for them and kept them in the game, when really we should have been 1-up. And they had a lot of class players, because they had won the European Cup that year. And here you see Aguas coming in, who was a good player.
And that's a killer goal.
And that was a killer goal for us. And we knew that it was going to be an uphill struggle from then. You can see there, if I'd have just got a little touch to it, maybe things would have gone our way. And when they did go our way, like there, we thought, right, we're now back in the game and we're going to take this game.
Now, you were given offside there.
I was given offside. Now, bearing in mind, this was the second goal I'd been given offside for in this tie. One at home and one away now. You know, it was a bit of a body blow to us. And for us to pick ourselves up was very, very difficult. We felt the odds were against us. Here, Smithy knocks the first one in. So that puts us on level terms at home. But we've still got a long, long way to go in this tie. And we really did feel it didn't go for us. It was just one of those nights. They had their bit of unluck, I know, Eusebio hitting the crossbar there. But we just felt it was a night where we gave everything. We played really well. Our effort was 120, 130%. Everything was going for us. John White coming in on the ball there, and John, not normally in that sort of position, wins a penalty. Danny knocks the ball in the back of the net. Now suddenly we're back in it.
And you need one more goal now, don't you?
We need one more goal for a draw and a replay. And here you can see Jonesy. I mean, he's flying along. Get up, Cliff. Come on, you're not there. And this was what was happening to us all the time. We were so near and yet so far away. And they were hanging on. By this time, they'd gone. And we're hanging on by whatever bit of courage that they had. And they had a lot of courage because they were a good side.
They had a goal disallowed.
They had a goal disallowed themselves there, which it was...
And then Spurs were so close, weren't they, James? Because in the very last minute, Dave Mackay was on the ball here.
That's right.
To Cliffy Jones.
Well, he gives it Cliff. You see the run that Cliff goes on here.
Oh, it's a great move.
And this is a muddy ground, and everybody's sort of still going full blast. And I don't know what happened. Here's the Dave Mackay.
Last minute of the game.
Last minute of the game. Yeah. If that goes in, we get a replay, and I think we win it. But... you know, it wasn't... I think it was one of those things it wasn't to be.
But at least there was going to be some consolation for Spurs a month later when you won the FA Cup of 1962 against Burnley at Wembley.
Oh, yes, so without doubt. I mean, it was great consolation for me because, I mean, the lads had already won the Cup the year before. I mean, I don't think with Chelsea I'd gone further than the 4th round. And there to be in a final at Wembley.
And you scored the opening goal, as we shall now see, James.
Big Bobby Smith there being tackled by Tommy Cummins, and there's Bob Lord with the Queen, yours truly. And this was a lucky goal. It caught the back of my heel and I managed to spin round on it and bobble it in. It was one of those sort of goals that you half hit and they seemed to go through everybody and finally go in. But they had a good side, Burnley, in those days, led by Jimmy McIlroy, who was one of the greatest players of all time, probably. Ray Pointer, Jimmy Adamson, of course, Adam Blacklaw in goal. Their team was structured in such a way that it wouldn't be recognisable in Burnley today, obviously. And they came at us. They didn't for 1 minute think that it was all over after we'd scored. And there's a member of the crowd. And they attacked us down the flank, and there's Harris crossing the ball. And Jimmy Robson scoring, and dear old Bill Brown with his legs open there. I don't know what he was doing. The great man, Danny on the ball to Johnny Wyatt, and John to Cliff. Cliff was never out of a game for very long, as you know. This was a great move when you think about it. Straight from the off. And there's Adam Blacklaw being beaten by Bobby Smith. Good goal by Bobby, that one. And a lovely jump there. Look how high Cliff Jones gets against Adam Blacklaw. It's wonderful football. Terry Medwin comes in on the rebound and Tommy Cummins handles it. And I think this was the first penalty at Wembley for a long time in the final. And there's Danny slots it home, as only Danny would have the nerve to do.
They were glorious days, though, weren't they?
They were.
And the following year, I think Spurs became the first British side to win a major European championship, 1963. They won the Cup Winners' Cup final against Atletico Madrid in Rotterdam. But in fact, they weren't the favourites, were they, Spurs?
We did, actually. No, and we weren't the favourites. And poor old Bill Nicholson had gone through a pretty torrid time. I think Bill's bottle had really gone because Dave Mackay wasn't fit for the game. And that left him with a choice of having to play Tony Markey, who he was going to play anyway. He was going to drop Danny Blanchflower.
Really?
And Danny knew he was going to be
Really?
dropped. Oh, yeah. Danny knew that he was going to be dropped. I think Bill had it in his mind that the Atletico side was so good that he had to play a bit more defensive than normal, so he was going to line up with Dave Mackay and Tony Markey. But Dave wasn't fit, and he gave this team talk where he really built Atletico up into something that they obviously wasn't.
Who Billy Nick did?
Yeah. And at the end of it, we were all down and we were looking at our boots. And suddenly Danny just said, hold on a minute. He said, we haven't got a bad team here ourselves. We've got 500 caps between us. There's not a better player in Europe than Dave Mackay. Cliff Jones is the fastest thing on 2 legs. John White can do this. Smithy up front or back room. Greaves, he can knock one in, this, that, the other. And we all thought, oh, you know, Danny's got a point. We may not be as bad a side as all that. And, of course, that lifted our attitude, and we went out of that game with an entirely different attitude than I felt that we would have done, and it was purely down to Danny, who actually finished up playing, but he certainly wasn't going to.
He finished up playing. Dave Mackay didn't play in the end, did he?
No.
But it was a fabulous night for Tottenham again.
Enter Spurs and Atletico Madrid for the final of the European Cup Winners' Cup. After the long series of preliminary rounds, this was the climax. Winner take all. Would it be Madrid in striped shirts, the pre-match favourites who kicked off with this promising attack? Or would it be Spurs who found themselves every man Jack, or should I say Jim, in fabulous form? Watch Jimmy Greaves shake the post from this Dyson corner. A minute later and it's Greaves again to give Spurs that all-important lead. That was the goal, that was. It certainly inspired the Spurs to even greater efforts. White notches goal number 2. Madrid's half-time pep talk brought an early reward. Fullback Henry punches out a certain winner, but Collar scored from the resulting penalty. It certainly put new life into Madrid. For 20 minutes, they bombarded the Spurs' defence. But Spurs held out, and in the 67th minute, Dyson put them further ahead. Spurs were playing like the real champions they most certainly are. Greaves made it 4-1. Finally, Dyson made it 5-1. What a game. Danny received the cup that cheers not only him and Spurs supporters, but every English soccer fan.
A lot of dancing, I remember, in Rotterdam the night that was won.
There was, and one has to remember it's such a long time ago, but we were the first British team ever to bring home a major European championship.
And you scored the goals that were expected of you, but Terry Dyson, I mean, that was amazing.
Oh, little Terry, who was a great player, you know. He was the sort of player that you've always got to have in your side. What he lacked in ability, he made up for in effort, and he certainly did that night. And that was his night. And I always remember after the game, we was all happy and everything was right, and a very dour Bobby Smith. If I was you, Dyson, I'd pack it in now because you're not likely to have another game like that. You know? And then that was Bobby. You know, thanks, Bob, Terry Dyson.
Terrific.
It was wonderful.
A marvellous night. But your career continued to prosper with England.
England white shirts kick off at Wembley in their international against Northern Ireland. And before you could say Alf Ramsey, the home 11 had set the trend for the whole game. Winger Terry Payne got the first within 2 minutes. We'd previously seen England in their 2-1 win over the rest of the world, but this was to be a walkover. Payne gave Jimmy Greaves his chance for number 2. Three minutes later, the Spurs master craftsman repeated the performance. Terry Payne, the pride of Southampton, finished off number 4. This Greaves-Payne partnership was certainly the star duet of the match. But what about Ireland? Rather indecisive in attack, they did engineer many promising movements. But only one came off in the first half. And inside left, John Crossan made no mistake about it. The second half confirmed England's supremacy in the first. Bobby Smith got number 5. Although the Ulstermen had put up a better show against Scotland, they recovered prestige with Sammy Wilson's second. But England had the bit between their teeth. This was to be their biggest win since Mexico were defeated here over 3 years ago. Greaves came up with number 6. He's the only second division player in the side, but Terry Payne has the makings of an all-time great. He scored number 7. The player who already wears the crown of greatness brought off number 8, Jimmy Greaves.
Celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Football Association, the English 11 take the field at Wembley alongside a team representing the rest of the world. One of the greatest soccer encounters ever staged, it's the first time ever that a world team has played a single nation. Armfield and Di Stefano exchange courtesies, and the record crowd see England kick off. As Terry Payne takes it up on the right, we all hope that Alf Ramsey has picked a winning selection to face the best from the rest of the world. And as Liverpool's Gordon Milne takes it on, we wait to see if the world can reconcile 11 sparkling individualists into one effective combination. West Germany's Snellinger has a go from the left, but England's defence is barely tested. Right half Milne again to Arsenal's George Eastham. Then from Payne to Eastham and on to Jimmy Greaves. Not surprisingly, he had a go. But that's just a foretaste. Greaves has something even better up his sleeve. Jimmy to Spurs teammate Bobby Smith, and we're off with another fine bit of footwork. Payne in the picture again. Gordon Milne has a go. By the way, the Russian goalie Yashin's called the Black Octopus. 8 legs would be a help here, but Real Madrid's Hento manages pretty well with 2, passing back cunningly to his fellow countryman Di Stefano. The world centre-forward centres, but still no score as the game goes into its second phase, with the world substituting 5 of their players as agreed. Now it's Soskic in goal, with Ezequire, Baxter, Puskás and Zähler on the field. With 2 number 9s, it's sometimes difficult to pick out Di Stefano, but there's no mistaking Bobby Charlton, number 11. In the 54th minute, Greaves took a pass from Smith, then stumbling past Soskic, straight to the net. But the ref had already given a foul, so the goal was disallowed. However, it pointed the way to England's first score 12 minutes later. Terry Payne fairly hammered it home. You couldn't expect the world to take that lying down. Dennis Law got it inside right to Hento, and the Spaniard centres. A dangerous moment, but it's cleared safely. Not so fortunate next time when Dennis Law took a pass from Puskás and beat the English goalie to equalise. So to a classic situation in a classic match. 2 closely matched teams with 1 goal apiece. And what a satisfying finale to this centenary occasion. Charlton's victory pass and Greaves' triumphant winning goal. Let's hope the game's as good as this 100 years from now.
Well, you really were a prolific scorer. I think your fans would always say you made it look so ridiculously easy. And one of the things that people always say about you, you used to seem to pass the ball into the goal. You never believed in breaking the net with it.
I think, quite honestly, Brian, I never had that sort of ability. I think the idea of scoring goals was always to slide them in or get them in the best way you possibly can. And it's not necessary. You see a lot of players today make the mistake that they feel that they've got a blast in. They haven't. You pick your spot. And I think in doing so, you probably get more goals that way. Let's face it, you know, if I'd had scored every goal I'd missed and missed every goal I'd scored, I wouldn't half be in the record books, wouldn't I? But, you know, people tend not to talk about the goals you've missed.
Well, on one particular match in 62-63, you certainly didn't miss. You got 4, the record books say, against Liverpool. Now, that takes a bit of doing.
Yes, I suppose certainly by modern day standards.
I mean, Bill Shankly would have been the manager there, so the side would have been a pretty useful one.
Well, I mean, it arguably people will still say that was the greatest Liverpool side, was the early side, which included Roger Hunt, of course, Big Ron Yates, Ronald Powell, Ian St.
Whatever,
and. Gordon Milne. I mean, that was a good side.
So knocking 4 against them was no mean achievement.
Oh, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah. But we now come a little bit towards the downside of your career, because in 1965, I think it was, you had a bad attack of hepatitis, didn't you? Which knocked you out of the game, what, for about 4 months?
It did. It happened on bonfire night, funny enough. I felt quite ill taking the kids to fireworks, and went home, went to bed and didn't get up for 3 weeks. In fact, finished up in hospital for a couple of weeks with infective hepatitis. And it was diagnosed by a very famous consultant that I would never be the same player again.
Do you think you were?
I think she was right. It was a woman, and I think she was absolutely right. She said, "You'll lose a yard in pace," and I believe I did. I never got it back. It was a very hard struggle to get fit in time for the '66 World Cup.
Yeah,
because everything you did left you totally drained, Brian.
Yes. And do you think that then obviously it made the difference between you not getting into the side for Alf's 1966 World Cup winning side? Although you started in the side, didn't you?
No, I started in the side. I'd managed to fight my way back into the team, and I'd had a couple of good games prior to the World Cup. I remember a particularly good game against Norway, in Norway. And
you got 3 or 4 that night.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's right. And I thought I felt right for the World Cup, but it didn't happen for me.
Did it shake you, though, that he knocked you out of the World Cup side?
Well, essentially, you see, that wasn't the truth. The truth was that I had 5 stitches in my shin after the French game, which was a big gouge, and you could see the bone, and it took a bit
Which we'd won, hadn't we?
Which we'd won, and therefore we'd gone on to qualify against Argentina. And this had taken a big gouge out of my shin, and it took a bit of time to clear up, and it had got a little bit dirty, and it was a bit septic. So there was no way that I was fit anyway for the Argentinian game. So I wasn't dropped for the Argentinian game. I just wasn't fit. Jeff Hurst came in, took his chance, he scored the only goal of the match, and Alf kept it that way. And quite frankly, I think Alf was right to do so. I've always said Alf was right to do so. If you say, was I disappointed I didn't play in the '66 World Cup? Of course I was devastated. But it wasn't Alf's fault. It wasn't my fault, really. It was just the way things happened, Brian.
But when he came actually to announcing the side for the final in 1966, I mean, did Alf take you aside and say anything to you?
He took me to one side. He said, I think that you will have gathered by now that you won't be playing in the final. And I said, yeah, I've gathered that, Alf. He said, well, that's one of those things. And that was it. And we left it at that.
And so there's never been any antagonism between you?
On the contrary, I get on very well with Alf Ramsey. And since then, on the occasions that we've met, I feel that there's been a closeness between us, really. And we enjoy each other's company greatly, and I admire the man greatly. There was never... It was a bit like the AC Milan incident all those years beforehand, where it was built up in the press that we'd had rows and I'd been dropped, and that wasn't the case. I was totally devastated. Sure, I had the ump. Who wouldn't? You're missing the pinnacle of a lifetime. Of course you'd be fed up about it, but I didn't have the ump to Alf Ramsey or anything. I was just feeling very down, and who wouldn't feel down?
Well, something to raise your spirits, of course, was that Spurs were back at Wembley for the 1967 Cup final, an all-London Cup final against Chelsea, James.
No score until less than a minute before the interval. And here comes goal number 1 for Spurs. Muller's shot rebounds to Jimmy Robertson. Chelsea's attack couldn't match their defence, but even that defence was to crumble again. A superb goal from Saul with his back to the net. Two goals down. Chelsea's John Hollins proves that they're not down and out. And suddenly they're only 1 goal down. A dramatic score by Bobby Tambling, which gave Chelsea renewed hope and nearly brought an equaliser. But Spurs held them off and held on to a record only achieved once before. 5 times cup finalists, 5 times victorious.
So Spurs, the cup winners again, Jimmy. And in fact, you were scoring goals as well as ever, really, into the late 1960s. 68, 69, you became the top First Division scorer for a record 6th time. And people were then beginning to say, Greaves for England again. But let's have a look at some of the goals you were scoring, and particularly a cheeky free kick against Liverpool. And just watch for the antics of a certain Ian St John. Now, this might give you a bit of pleasure.
Well, I mean, look. It's just, he orders his breakfast like that on Saturdays for St and Greavesy, you know. And look, he's got the right ump, hasn't he? He really has, because he always talks about this goal as the referee not knowing what what he was doing.
Bill Shankly called you a thief, I think, for taking this one, didn't he? I mean, the way you take this free kick.
I think he did do it at the end of the day, but you see, they can't... I mean, Liverpool here, look at that, there's some ugly men there, aren't there? Tommy Smith, Emlyn Hughes. Can't catch me, I'm miles away from him. I think Liverpool obviously were victims of their own professionalism here because they're lining up far too near the ball, and the referee now is over-exaggerating the fact by taking it back that far. Now, you can see that a certain Mr. St John, yet again, doesn't quite agree with the situation.
And while they're all arguing...
Well, while they're arguing, Alan Mullery and Terry Venables were deciding who was going to take it and what they were going to do. And I thought, well, this is a waste of time because they're arguing... And neither of them knew, and I thought, well, let's get the ball in the back of the net and we'll worry about it afterwards. And that's what happened.
Well, it's a bit of typical Greaves quick thinking. And here's another great piece of Jimmy Greaves' skill.
Was Newcastle were well on the attack at the time because they were one down, and I managed to collect the ball from a wild clearance and pick it up and take it on. This was against Gordon Banks. Here, the mighty man foils me, as you can see. Never liked Banksy saving my shots, but there you are, sweet revenge in the back of the net. Banksy on the floor. Pick that one out, Gordon. So there you are.
Yes. But then we come now to a point where your Tottenham career is now coming to an end, isn't it? And there's talk of you going to West Ham as a make-weight for the move for Martin Peters going there. Now, tell me what happened there,
I'll tell you, to be perfectly honest, the talk was the fact I was going to become a racing driver, but what I was actually going to do was rally to Mexico for Fords, rather, because I knew I wasn't going to get back in the England team, although, as you say, people were arguing about the merits of me getting back into the England team. And the reason for not wanting to be considered was I was committed to do the rally for Fords. So that's what I did. But it was on the day that we moved house, and I got a phone call from Bill Nicholson. And it was a strange call because he said, "Is that you, Jim?" I went, "Yes, Bill." He said, "I've got Martin Peters in my office." I thought, well, what's he talking to me about Martin Peters for? And he said, "I'd like to buy him, but Ron Greenwood wants you in Part X." He wants a clapped-out old model, obviously. "Would you go over to West Ham?" And he said, "It needs to be done in the next hour or so because of the transfer deadline." And I put the phone down, and I thought after 9 years or so that, I don't know, I just felt a bit disillusioned with it all, that I thought that dear old Bill, who I've got no greater admiration for any man on earth more than Bill Nicholson, could do it. So I thought, well, I'll go over and see Ron. And I went over there, and I thought, well, let's do it.
Did it mean you left Tottenham with a little bit of a bad taste in your mouth?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. I was at Tottenham a while ago, and Brian Curtin, the old doctor, came up to me and said, "You've never forgiven us for the way we got rid of you, have you?" And I did say, well, it was very hard, Brian. I think it could have been done a lot better. I didn't want to go. I'd never asked for a transfer. I'd never put in for a move. I'd never once intimated to Bill that I wanted to leave the club. I just wanted to sort of find my form, do my rally, and then come back the following season and start afresh. And I feel I still had a lot to offer Tottenham. I had nothing to offer West Ham. My heart was still at White Hart Lane, really.
And yet, in your first game for West Ham against Manchester City at Main Road, you did what you always do. You scored on your debut.
Holland surely was offside. This is Greaves. Still there, Greaves. Ten minutes of the match gone, and Jimmy Greaves has done it again. Scored on his debut for every club, for Chelsea, for Tottenham, for England, for AC Milan, and now for West Ham United. There are enough players up. Holland, first, Greaves coming in, number 2.
I say, looking at that, it seems to me you had plenty to offer West Ham, but in that close season, that's when you went off and did your rally in Mexico, didn't you? I mean,
yes.
how well did you do there, Jim?
I don't know, we finished 6th from 113 starters. In fact, only 11 finished the rally. It was 16,000 miles.